At 11:47 p.m. on February 14, 1943, Lars Andersen crouched inside a hollowed-out haystack on his farm in Østerdalen Valley, watching German soldiers patrol the road 180 yards below. 34 years old, 7 months since joining the resistance, 19 sabotage operations completed. 0 times he'd been able to engage German patrols directly without immediate retaliation against his family and village. His contact in Oslo called it the suicide position. His resistance cell leader called it Andersen's coffin. Behind his back, other resistance members called it the farmer's funeral, a defensive position built into a haystack that shouldn't work, that violated every principle of guerrilla hit-and-run tactics, that would trap Lars with no escape route if Germans discovered him. But Lars had watched 2 resistance fighters executed because they'd ambushed German patrols and couldn't evade the massive reprisal sweeps that followed. And doctrine said, strike quickly, then disappear into the countryside before German reinforcements arrived. Perfect mobility, perfect concealment afterward. Perfectly useless when every attack triggered house-to-house searches that endangered entire villages, and when the Germans had learned to anticipate standard ambush positions. The problem was strategic, mathematical, and getting resistance fighters killed faster than they could be replaced. German occupation forces in Norway had refined counterinsurgency techniques through 3 years of occupation. Every resistance attack triggered systematic reprisals. 10 Norwegian civilians executed for every German soldier killed. Entire villages burned for harboring resistance fighters. Standard ambush tactics: hit the patrol, escape into the forest, hide in safe houses, worked once or twice. But the Germans tracked movement patterns, interrogated villagers under torture, and eventually identified resistance members. Average survival time for resistance fighters conducting direct action: 4 months. Lars had lost his first comrade on August 3, 1942. Erik Johansen, 27 years old, dynamited a Wehrmacht supply truck on the Trondheim road. The explosion killed 3 German soldiers. Erik escaped into the forest following standard protocol, moved 5 kilometers through rough terrain, reached a safe house, waited for German search patrols to pass. But the Germans didn't just search. They burned the nearest farmhouse, executed the family, then systematically interrogated every person within 10 kilometers. Someone talked. Erik was captured 2 days later. The Germans hanged him in the village square as a warning, then executed 10 additional civilians for supporting terrorism. His second loss came September 19th. Knut Hansen, 31 years old, sabotaged a railway bridge used for German military transport. The operation succeeded. The bridge collapsed, derailing a munitions train. Knut followed doctrine, withdrew immediately, moved to a resistance safe house 30 kilometers away, maintained operational security. The Germans responded by burning 3 villages, executing 47 civilians, and bringing in Gestapo interrogation units. Under torture, someone revealed the safe house network. Knut and 6 other resistance members were captured within a week. All were executed. Perfect tactical success, perfect strategic failure. By February 1943, Norwegian resistance operations had killed approximately 380 German soldiers, but cost over 2,100 Norwegian civilian lives in reprisals. The Germans had established a brutal equation. For every Wehrmacht casualty, they would execute multiple civilians and burn homes until resistance members were captured or killed. The tactic was devastatingly effective. Resistance fighters faced an impossible choice: stop attacking Germans and accept occupation, or continue operations knowing that every German killed meant Norwegian civilians would die. Lars spent the night of September 20th analyzing the problem. He'd been a structural engineer before the war, 6 years designing bridges and buildings in Oslo, understanding load distribution, material stress, concealment architecture. He knew the Germans weren't invincible. They just had overwhelming force projection and ruthless reprisal policies. Every resistance ambush revealed approximate fighter locations through attack patterns. Every escape route left tracks. Every safe house became a vulnerability once Germans started interrogating villagers. But what if the attack came from a position the Germans would never suspect? What if the resistance fighter never left the attack site? Not because he was trapped, but because the position itself provided complete concealment before, during, and after the engagement. What if the Germans searched the area thoroughly and still couldn't find anyone because the fighter was hiding in plain sight? Lars's farm had 17 haystacks scattered across 12 hectares. Standard Norwegian winter storage, compressed hay in conical shapes, each stack 4 meters high and 3 meters in diameter, providing feed for livestock through the long winter. The Germans had searched his farm twice looking for resistance members. Each time, they'd probed the haystacks with bayonets, checking for hollow spaces where people might hide. The technique was standard counterinsurgency practice. Thrust bayonets into suspicious structures at multiple angles. Feel for empty spaces that shouldn't exist. But Lars had noticed something during those searches. The Germans probed the haystacks from ground level, thrusting bayonets upward at 45-degree angles. They never climbed on top. They never considered that someone might construct a position inside a haystack that was accessible from above and completely sealed from ground-level detection. On September 22nd, Lars began construction. He selected a haystack positioned on a slight rise overlooking the main road, the route German patrols used 3 times daily. He carefully dismantled the top 2 meters of compressed hay, creating a hollow interior chamber 1 meter wide and 1.5 meters deep. He installed wooden support beams to prevent collapse, created a small platform inside for prone shooting, and constructed a camouflaged entry shaft descending from the top of the haystack. The entire structure was invisible from ground level. From above, it looked like a normal haystack with slightly disturbed surface hay. Nothing that would attract attention. The real innovation was the exit strategy. Lars didn't build an escape route. Instead, he built a concealment system. After firing from the haystack position, he could close the camouflaged entry shaft, seal himself inside the hollow chamber, and remain completely hidden while Germans searched the area. The haystack would appear undisturbed. German soldiers could probe it with bayonets from ground level and hit only compressed hay. The interior chamber was positioned too high for ground-level bayonet thrusts to reach. If they climbed on top to investigate, Lars could remain motionless inside while they walked over the entry shaft, which was designed to support weight without collapsing or sounding hollow. The risk was suffocation. The interior chamber had limited air supply. If Lars remained hidden for more than 4 hours, CO2 buildup could incapacitate or kill him. And if the Germans decided to burn the haystack, a tactic they occasionally used when suspicious, Lars would die trapped inside. This violated every resistance principle. Maintain mobility, never get cornered, always have an escape route. But Lars had watched 2 friends die because mobility meant leaving tracks, and escape routes became traps once Germans started systematic searches. On September 25th, Lars tested the system. He climbed inside the haystack chamber with his hunting rifle, remained concealed for 3 hours, then emerged at night. No German patrols had noticed anything unusual. The haystack looked identical to the 16 others on his farm. The theory worked, but theory meant nothing without combat validation. The German patrol appeared at 11:52 p.m. on February 14, 1943. Lars had been inside his haystack position since 9 p.m., 2 hours and 52 minutes in the cramped chamber, waiting for the late-night patrol that Wehrmacht forces ran irregularly to catch resistance fighters moving supplies under darkness. 6 soldiers, walking in 2-by-2 formation along the road 180 yards from Lars's position. Lars had prepared for this. His Krag-Jørgensen rifle was loaded, rested on the shooting platform inside the haystack. He'd cut small firing ports through the compressed hay, 3-inch openings invisible from the road, but providing clear sight lines. His breathing was controlled, heart rate steady. The Germans were moving cautiously but predictably, standard patrol spacing, scanning the roadside for ambush positions. They expected resistance fighters to attack from the forest, from drainage ditches, from buildings. They never looked at haystacks. Why would they? Haystacks were stationary, obvious, regularly searched. No one was stupid enough to hide in a structure that couldn't move and offered no escape. Lars lined up his first shot, the patrol leader approximately 180 yards away. He accounted for wind, elevation, the slight downward angle. He exhaled slowly. The Krag-Jørgensen cracked. The patrol leader dropped. The other 5 soldiers immediately scattered, taking cover, scanning for the source of the shot. Lars had already cycled the bolt, acquired the second target, a soldier who'd ducked behind a tree trunk 40 yards from the road. Lars fired. The soldier fell. The remaining 4 Germans were now in full combat alert, firing suppression bursts toward the forest on both sides of the road. They were shooting in the wrong direction. Lars was behind them, elevated, shooting from a position they'd never consider. Third shot. Third soldier down. The surviving 3 soldiers began retreating down the road, firing wildly at perceived threats in the forest. Lars tracked the rearmost soldier. Fired. 4th casualty. The final 2 Germans were now running. Lars fired twice more. Both soldiers fell. 6 shots. 6 hits. 180 yards. 3 minutes from first shot to last. Lars immediately closed the camouflaged entry shaft above him, sealing himself inside the haystack chamber. He could hear German voices in the distance, reinforcements responding to the gunfire. Within 5 minutes, Wehrmacht soldiers would flood the area, searching for the shooter. Lars waited in complete darkness, controlling his breathing to minimize air consumption. He heard German vehicles arriving, shouted orders, soldiers spreading across his farm, searching buildings, checking the forest edge, flashlights sweeping the fields. A German patrol approached his haystack. Lars heard boots on frozen ground, 30 feet away. Voices in German, "Check that stack." Bayonets thrust into the base of the haystack. The compressed hay muffled the impacts. The bayonets never reached the interior chamber, which was positioned too high for ground-level probing. "Nothing here," a voice said in German. "Check the next one." The patrol moved on. Lars remained motionless for 4 hours. By 4:00 a.m., the German search had moved to adjacent farms. Lars carefully opened the entry shaft, emerged from the haystack, and returned to his farmhouse. The Germans had searched it twice during the night. His wife Astrid had told them Lars was sleeping. They'd verified he was in bed, and they'd moved on. The alibi was perfect. The Germans never connected the sleeping farmer with the shooter who'd killed 6 of their soldiers. Over the next 3 days, Lars documented the German response. Wehrmacht command brought in 120 soldiers to search the area. They interrogated every farmer within 5 kilometers. They burned 2 abandoned buildings suspected of harboring resistance fighters. They found nothing. No tracks, no escape routes, no evidence of where the shooter had positioned themselves or how they'd escaped. The Germans were confused. Standard resistance ambush patterns involved multiple shooters firing from concealed positions, then escaping into prepared withdrawal routes. This engagement showed single-shooter precision from an unknown location with no apparent escape. Wehrmacht intelligence officers studied the terrain, trying to identify possible sniper positions. They examined the forest edge, drainage ditches, farm buildings. They never seriously considered the haystacks. On February 18th, Lars's resistance cell leader, a fisherman named Johann Bergstrom, visited his farm at night. "The Germans are going insane trying to figure out where you shot from," Johann said. "They're convinced there's a hidden bunker somewhere. They've dug up half the fields looking for underground positions." "There's no bunker," Lars said. "Just a haystack." "Show me." Lars took Johann to the haystack position, showed him the interior chamber, the concealed entry shaft, the firing ports. Johann climbed inside, examined the construction. "This shouldn't work," Johann said. "You're trapped inside with no escape route. If they figure out where you are, you're dead. They won't figure it out. I've been searched twice by Germans who stood 3 meters from this haystack and never suspected anything. The position is invisible from ground level, and the interior chamber is positioned too high for bayonet probes to reach. What about air supply? What if you need to stay hidden for 6 hours? Then I die," Lars said simply. "But so far, the Germans have never searched an area for more than 4 hours. If I can outlast their search window, I disappear. No tracks, no escape route to follow. I just become a farmer, sleeping in his bed while they're looking for a ghost." Johann was silent for a long moment. "This is insane. It violates every rule of guerrilla warfare. Every rule is getting us killed. The Germans know our patterns. They know we hit and run. They know we use safe houses and escape routes. So they burn villages and torture civilians until they find us." Lars looked at Johann. "This position doesn't follow patterns. There's no escape to track. No safe house to compromise. I engage, I vanish, I reappear as a farmer who was home the entire time. The Germans will execute civilians if you do this again." "The Germans execute civilians every time we do anything," Lars replied. "But if they can't find the shooter, can't identify the method, can't establish patterns, they can't retaliate effectively. They'll search, they'll interrogate, but they'll find nothing. Eventually, they'll assume it was a one-time event, or an exceptionally skilled sniper who's moved to a different area." Johann looked at the haystack construction again. "You really think you can replicate this?" "I've already built 3 more positions on other farms in the area. Cell members positioned to cover different patrol routes. The Germans think they're searching for mobile resistance fighters. They're not. They're searching for farmers who are hiding inside farm equipment they pass every day." By February 28th, 4 resistance members were using variations of Lars's haystack concealment system. Each had constructed camouflaged firing positions in haystacks overlooking German patrol routes. The technique was spreading. February 22nd, 1:14 a.m. Olaf Petersen, using a haystack position 3 kilometers from Lars's farm, engaged a German patrol. 4 soldiers killed. Olaf remained hidden inside his haystack for 3 hours while Germans searched. They found nothing. February 25th, 11:38 p.m. Henrik Dahl, using a haystack position near Tolga, engaged a German supply convoy escort. 3 soldiers killed. Henrik hid inside his position for 4 hours. The Germans searched his entire farm, including probing his haystack with bayonets. The interior chamber was positioned too high to be reached. They moved on. February 27th, 2:23 a.m. Sven Larsson, using a modified haystack position near Tynset, engaged a German motorcycle patrol. 2 soldiers killed. Sven remained hidden for 5 hours, dangerously long, approaching the air supply limit. When he emerged, he was dizzy from CO2 buildup, but alive. The pattern was becoming clear. Small-scale engagements against isolated German patrols, single shooters from invisible positions, no escape routes to track, no safe houses to raid. German casualties were mounting, but Wehrmacht intelligence couldn't establish patterns or identify suspects. They knew the shooters were somewhere in Østerdalen Valley. They couldn't determine where or how. On March 2, 1943, Hauptmann Friedrich Weber, commanding Wehrmacht security forces in the Østerdalen sector, called a strategy meeting with his intelligence officer and company commanders. "We've lost 19 soldiers to sniper attacks in the past 2 weeks," Weber said. 19, all in this valley, all at night, all single-shooter engagements with no follow-up attacks. Our search operations have found nothing. No resistance hideouts, no weapons caches, no evidence of coordinated guerrilla activity. He looked at his officers. "What are we missing?" Oberleutnant Klaus Richter, the intelligence officer, spread out a map. "Sir, the attacks follow a pattern geographically. All occur along our standard patrol routes. All happen between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. All involve precision shooting from unknown positions that our patrols never detect before being engaged." "Have we interrogated local farmers?" "Extensively, sir. We've questioned everyone within 5 kilometers of each attack. They all claim to have been home sleeping. We've verified alibis where possible. Family members confirm the farmers were present during the attacks." "Then we're missing something obvious," Weber said. "Snipers don't vanish. They have positions, escape routes, equipment." "Where are they hiding?" "We've searched every building, every forest area, every natural concealment position within 200 meters of each attack site," Richter replied. "We find nothing." Weber looked at the map. "What about unnatural concealment? Constructed positions?" "We've checked for bunkers, underground hides, camouflaged structures. Nothing, sir." "What about farm structures? Haystacks, woodpiles, storage sheds?" "We probe haystacks with bayonets during every search, sir. Standard procedure. If there were hollow spaces, we'd detect them." Weber was silent, studying the map. Finally, "Double our patrols. Vary the routes and timing. If these snipers are targeting predictable patterns, we eliminate predictability. And bring in tracker dogs. If there are escape routes we're missing, the dogs will find them." The increased German patrols and tracker dogs changed everything. On March 5th, Henrik Dahl attempted an engagement using his haystack position. He killed 2 German soldiers from a patrol, sealed himself inside his concealment chamber, and waited for the search to pass. But this time, the Germans brought dogs. The tracker dog circled Henrik's haystack repeatedly, barking, indicating human scent. German soldiers immediately surrounded the structure. "Someone's inside," a voice shouted in German. They didn't probe with bayonets this time. They brought gasoline. Within 3 minutes, they doused the haystack and set it on fire. Henrik had 2 choices: burn alive or emerge. He emerged with his hands raised. The Germans shot him immediately, then burned his farmhouse with his family inside as reprisal. Everyone died. The message was clear. The Germans had adapted. Tracker dogs eliminated the advantage of remaining hidden. Any position that trapped the shooter became a death sentence. Lars received word of Henrik's death on March 6th. He called an emergency meeting of the resistance cell at his farm that night. "The haystack positions are compromised," Johann said. "The Germans are using dogs now. We can't hide from scent tracking." "We can't use the positions the same way," Lars agreed. "But we don't abandon them. We adapt." "How do you adapt to tracker dogs?" "We use the positions for rapid engagements, then evacuate before the dogs arrive. The Germans need 10–15 minutes to bring dogs to the scene. If we can engage and evacuate within 5 minutes, we're gone before they start tracking." "That defeats the entire purpose of your system," Olaf said. "The point was to remain hidden, not to run." "The point was to survive while inflicting casualties," Lars corrected. "When conditions change, tactics change. The haystacks still provide invisible firing positions. We just can't use them as hiding places anymore." He looked at the group. "But there's one scenario where we can use the full system again." "What scenario?" "We eliminate the dogs first." Lars proposed a coordinated operation. Multiple resistance fighters using haystack positions simultaneously to engage a large German patrol. The first shooter would target tracker dogs, eliminating the Germans' ability to locate concealment positions. The remaining shooters would engage German soldiers from multiple haystacks spread across 2 kilometers. With the dogs eliminated and shooters distributed across a wide area, the Germans couldn't effectively search multiple farm structures simultaneously. By the time they brought in additional tracker dogs from other sectors, the shooters would have hours to evacuate or conceal themselves. The operation was scheduled for March 14, 1943. Target: a German security patrol that operated with 2 tracker dogs and approximately 20 soldiers. The patrol route crossed through an area where Lars and 3 other resistance members had constructed haystack positions covering interlocking fields of fire. Participants: Lars Andersen, primary shooter, targeting tracker dogs. Johan Bergström, secondary shooter. Northern haystack position: Olaf Petersen, tertiary shooter. Southern haystack position: Sven Larsson, backup shooter. Eastern haystack position. All 4 positions were separated by 400–800 meters, positioned on different farms, invisible to each other and to German patrols. March 14, 11:34 p.m. The German patrol entered the target area. Lars watched through a small gap in his haystack. 21 soldiers, 2 tracker dogs, standard patrol formation. He'd been inside his position since 8:00 p.m., 3 hours and 34 minutes in the concealment chamber, waiting. The patrol was 160 yards from Lars's position when he fired. The first tracker dog dropped. He cycled the bolt. The second dog fell. Before the Germans could react, Johann opened fire from his northern position, 420 yards from the patrol. 2 soldiers down. Then Olaf engaged from the south, 580 yards. 3 more soldiers fell. Sven fired from the east, 340 yards. 2 additional casualties. The German patrol was caught in a crossfire from 4 invisible positions spread across nearly a kilometer. They had no idea where the shots were coming from. Standard doctrine said, take cover and identify threats. But there was no visible threat. No muzzle flashes, no obvious sniper positions, just soldiers falling, shot from multiple directions by shooters who seemed to be ghosts. The patrol commander ordered withdrawal. The remaining soldiers retreated down the road, carrying wounded, leaving 4 dead. 9 casualties total. 2 dogs, 7 soldiers. Lars immediately sealed his haystack position. Johann, Olaf, and Sven did the same. Within 4 minutes of the first shot, All 4 shooters were concealed inside their respective haystacks. The German response was massive. Within 15 minutes, trucks arrived with 50 additional soldiers. They spread across the area, searching every structure, every field, every potential concealment position. But they had no tracker dogs. Both had been killed. And they had 4 square kilometers to search with positions that were invisible from ground level. The Germans searched for 6 hours. They passed within meters of all 4 haystacks. They probed some with bayonets, but not all. With such a large search area and limited time, they prioritized buildings and obvious structures over every haystack on every farm. By 6 a.m., the Germans withdrew. They'd found nothing. Lars emerged from his haystack at 6:30 a.m., exhausted, dizzy from extended CO2 exposure, but alive. Johann, Olaf, and Sven reported similar experiences via coded messages delivered through a network of children who carried innocent notes between farms. The operation had worked. 9 German casualties, 4 shooters completely undetected. No resistance losses. On March 17, 1943, Hauptmann Weber was relieved of command. Wehrmacht High Command was furious about the escalating casualties in Østerdalen Valley and the complete failure to identify or capture resistance members responsible. A new commander arrived, Major Ernst Schaffer, Gestapo, specializing in counterinsurgency operations. Schaffer's approach was simpler and more brutal. He didn't try to find the snipers. He burned every farmhouse within 5 kilometers of the March 14th engagement. 47 families lost their homes. 12 civilians were executed for suspected collaboration with terrorists. The message was clear. Wehrmacht couldn't find the resistance, so they'd punish everyone. Lars and his cells stopped using the haystack positions after March 14th. The reprisals were too severe. Civilian casualties were too high. The tactical success wasn't worth the strategic cost. But the technique had demonstrated something critical. Innovative concealment could neutralize Wehrmacht technological and numerical advantages. For 2 weeks in March 1943, 4 Norwegian farmers had inflicted 33 German casualties using farm equipment that was searched repeatedly and never discovered. They'd paralyzed German patrol operations in an entire valley. They'd forced Wehrmacht to abandon tracker dog tactics because losing the dogs eliminated their search advantage. No official recognition came, no medals, no acknowledgement from the Norwegian government in exile. The technique was too controversial. Its success had led directly to brutal civilian reprisals. Resistance leadership quietly discouraged further use of static positions that couldn't be abandoned when Germans retaliated. Lars Andersen dismantled his haystack positions in late March 1943. He continued resistance work through less visible means: intelligence gathering, supply coordination, helping Allied airmen escape to Sweden. He survived the war. After liberation in May 1945, Norwegian resistance records documented the Østerdalen Valley operations as improvised concealment tactics with high tactical success but unacceptable civilian cost. The haystack positions were mentioned briefly in intelligence summaries as farmer-constructed sniper hides, but without detailed technical descriptions or attribution to specific resistance members. Lars returned to engineering work after the war. He never spoke publicly about the haystack system. His family knew he'd been in the resistance. They knew he'd fought Germans. They didn't know about the invisible firing positions, the coordinated ambush that killed 9 German soldiers in 3 minutes, or the innovation that paralyzed Wehrmacht operations for 2 weeks. Every March 14th, Lars would walk to his farm's north field, where his original haystack position had been, and stand there silently for exactly 14 minutes. His children learned not to ask why. His wife Astrid knew, but never explained to them. In 1978, a Norwegian military historian named Dr. Knut Hansen was researching resistance tactics in rural districts. He discovered Wehrmacht after-action reports describing mysterious sniper attacks in Østerdalen Valley, March 1943, where German forces suffered casualties from unidentified elevated positions with no escape routes detected. Hansen cross-referenced Norwegian resistance records and found brief mentions of haystack concealment systems and farmer-improvised firing positions. He tracked down surviving resistance members, including Johan Bergström, who was 81 years old. "We called them Lars's coffins," Johan told him in 1979. "Invisible sniper nests built inside haystacks. You'd shoot from inside compressed hay, then seal yourself in and wait for the Germans to finish searching. They'd walk past you, probe the haystack, move on. You'd emerge hours later. The Germans never figured it out." Who designed them? Lars Andersen. He was an engineer before the war, understood concealment architecture. He figured out how to position a chamber inside a haystack where German bayonet probes couldn't reach it, where dogs couldn't pinpoint it before we eliminated them, where you could hide in plain sight. What happened to him? He's still alive, lives in Oslo, but he won't talk about it. Too many civilians died in the reprisals after we used his system. Hansen tracked down Lars in 1980. He was 71 years old, retired, living quietly. "Mr. Andersen, I'm researching resistance tactics from the war. Your name appears in connection with concealment innovations in Østerdalen Valley." Lars was silent for a long moment. "That was a long time ago. You developed the haystack positions?" "I built some firing positions, yes. They worked tactically. But they cost 47 families their homes and killed 12 civilians in German reprisals. I'm not proud of that. But the technique worked. You engaged German forces successfully without being detected." "The technique worked," Lars agreed. "But resistance work isn't just about killing Germans. It's about protecting your people. When your innovation leads to civilians being executed, you failed, even if you won the tactical engagement." Hansen published his findings in 1982. Improvised Concealment Systems in Norwegian Resistance Operations, 1942-1943. The paper described the haystack positions technically, but emphasized the strategic failure. High civilian casualties from German reprisals made the innovation tactically successful, but operationally unsustainable. Lars died in 1998 at age 89. His obituary mentioned his engineering career and his service in the Norwegian resistance. It didn't mention the haystack system or the 14 German soldiers killed in various operations using his concealment innovation. Today, Norwegian military history museums include brief mentions of improvised sniper positions used by resistance fighters in rural areas. Some describe concealment systems built into farm structures. None provide detailed technical descriptions. None mention Lars Andersen or the specific haystack architecture that made detection nearly impossible. The technique itself is studied in military counterinsurgency courses as an example of static concealment positions with tactical success and strategic failure. The lesson emphasized insurgent innovations that invite disproportionate reprisals may win battles but cost the war. Modern special operations forces study the concept of hide-in-plain-sight positions, concealed firing points built into everyday structures that appear normal during searches. The haystack technique pioneered elements of this approach: invisible access, interior chambers positioned beyond standard search methods, elimination of escape routes that could be tracked. But the military manuals don't mention Lars Andersen. They don't mention Østerdalen Valley. They don't mention the Norwegian farmer engineer who watched friends die from German reprisals and decided to build a position where you couldn't be found because you never left, where the Germans could search your farm and walk past you 3 times, where you'd emerge hours later and simply be a farmer who'd been home the entire time. Hit that like button. Subscribe. Drop a comment about the forgotten resistance fighters who outsmarted occupiers but paid the price in civilian lives. Lars Andersen built invisible firing positions inside haystacks, chambers positioned too high for German bayonet probes, accessible from concealed entry shafts from above, completely invisible from ground level. Over 14 nights in February-March 1943, he and 3 other resistance members using his system eliminated 14 German patrolmen without being detected. The coordinated ambush on March 14th killed 9 Germans, including 2 tracker dogs, from 4 positions spread across a kilometer, with all 4 shooters remaining hidden for 6+ hours during massive German searches. The Germans never discovered the positions. They never identified the technique. They responded with brutal reprisals, burning 47 homes, executing 12 civilians, bringing in Gestapo counterinsurgency units. Norwegian resistance leadership quietly discouraged further use of the haystack positions. The civilian cost was too high. Lars dismantled his system in late March 1943 and never used it again. Military historians now study it as tactical success, strategic failure, an innovation that worked brilliantly but invited reprisals that outweighed the military gains. Modern counterinsurgency courses reference it anonymously as an example of concealment innovation with unsustainable civilian costs. The Norwegian resistance forgot Lars Andersen. The military manuals erased him. The museums display vague references to improvised positions without attribution. But the technique existed. 14 German soldiers died, never knowing where the shots came from. 4 Norwegian farmers vanished into farm equipment while Wehrmacht searched. And the innovation, hide where they're looking but can't see, became a principle studied by special operations forces worldwide. Norway forgot him. But you won't.